there's some very high percentage, roughly 40%, of what they think of as like dark matter and what they don't actually know about.
I always thought we have solved the asset problem. Why are we talking still about asset management as a whole industry, even today, after all these years?
If you ask your average CISO, like, is this a problem that they have solved? The answer is a resounding no, basically every single time.
Asset identification and understanding your landscape is the most critical thing you could possibly do.
We'd be having a different conversation, not fully appreciating how quickly this is going to come at us.
With AI, you can build, but at least today, you can't operate and manage.
I actually do see in the next 3 to 5 years, the traditional UI going away and everything basically becoming a prompt. This is not the movement of on-prem to cloud. This is like the creation of the internet.
How do you define assets when it comes to AI? Is it something that is ephemeral? Is it something that is running for hours versus minutes? Or is it just a prompt? We explored the evolving world of asset intelligence exposure management when it comes to AI with Joe Diamond from Axonius. Caleb and I spoke about the change that asset management has gone and why some parts are still unsolved and what parts remain as asset intelligence continues to evolve more than just a CMDB, and where is the future going with this? All that and a lot more in this episode of AI Security Podcast. As always, if you are listening or watching an episode of AI Security Podcast for the second or third time and have been finding it valuable, I would really appreciate if you take a quick second to drop a follow, subscribe, whichever podcast platform you listen to this on. We are on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and LinkedIn. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and thank you to Axonius for sponsoring this episode of AI Security Podcast. Talk to you soon. Peace. Hello and welcome to another episode of AI Security Podcast. I've got Joe Diamond with me. Hey man, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Maybe to quick start, if you could just give a bit about yourself, your professional background, that'll be great to hear.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in cyber quite literally my entire life. Was the nerdy kid, coding as an 8-year-old in my room, built a bunch of server network infrastructure as a child, as a 9-year-old. Had an IT and cyber consultancy as a 15-year-old. So this has literally been in my blood since the very beginning. Went to product before it was even called product, and then have kind of been in the industry since on the software vendor side. I'm working for companies like, Proofpoint, Okta, Risk IQ before I joined Axonius. So yeah, been a long history of doing a bunch of things. And I've run almost every function under the sun at this point, everything from, product strategy to product marketing to being, like I said, a practitioner myself to sales, marketing. So been around the block a little bit on the cyber side.
Awesome. And maybe this is a good way to transition into something that has been in cybersecurity for a long time, which is the whole asset conversation, right? I think maybe to start off with, I always thought we have solved the asset problem. Why are we talking still about asset management as a whole industry, even today, after all these years? This is a tricky question.
Is it though? I mean, I'll actually flip that back at you, Ashish. What made you think that problem was solved? Out of curiosity.
Caleb, I was obviously, I was,
well.
Yeah.
I didn't say that comment. I didn't say I.
Yeah. Come on, guys. Come on.
I just want to make that clear.
I was trying to lay the foundation for why it's one of the hardest conversations. Instead of asking why is it one of the hardest things to solve, I was going to flip that by saying that, hey, because most people, and this is probably people who are new to cybersecurity or have been in cybersecurity in different parts of cybersecurity, they almost always feel, why do we still talk about asset management? It should be obvious that Ashish owns a particular resource. And I'm not even talking about IoT devices, OT devices. I'm answering your question, Joe, by the way.
No, it's totally fine. You can take it wherever you'd like. It's your show.
Yeah. So I think that's where I was coming from. It's like, why is it that we're talking about asset management? Like, obviously, the transition between data centers, cloud, and now AI. I'm curious to see from your part, from your experience, from what you're seeing, how different is asset management in the kind of the trajectory it has had all these years?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe one of the challenges is that some people think that it's a solved problem, and it never was a solved problem, let alone being an exacerbated problem by AI and cloud and mobile and all the other different sort of like attack surfaces that have been introduced over time. This was never something that was particularly well solved. When you think about like the old asset management space, it was solved by, having agents on devices or network sensors. You're not going to have an agent on every device, and not every, asset is going to be working off of networks that you control. So in my experience, in most of my conversations recently, which is like numbers in the hundreds, frankly, you ask your average CISO, like, is this a problem that they have solved? The answer is a resounding no, basically every single time. And what I typically run into is that there's some degree of confidence about like 50 to 60% of like their coverage and understanding of what their environment looks like. But they kind of recognize that there's, some very high percentage, roughly 40%, of what they think of as like dark matter and what they don't actually know about. So it's kind of like anything else in cyber. I think a lot of the value comes from the blocking and the tackling of the basics that people take for granted and probably don't do all that well, and frankly have shiny object syndrome and move to, what's interesting without having a lot of the fundamentals solved for.
One of the things that I've always struggled with in talking about this topic is asking people what their definition of an asset is.
Yeah.
That is widely varied based on who you decide to talk to.
It is. And I think, for us, we start with an opinionated view, obviously, because you have to have a target to point at in terms of like what is an asset, but then you give the customer the ability to refine that based on their own definitions. Is a container an asset? Is it not an asset? Is it ephemeral, asset an asset? Is it not an asset? Is a device an asset? Like that, there are things that are, I think, less up for debate than others, but there are some that are going to vary from organization to organization. And for us, it's all about kind of, like I said, having that opinionated view and then giving the organization the ability to refine it however it is that their definitions land.
Yeah, I would love to just make sure we tell the readers that, in my opinion, asset identification and understanding your landscape is the most critical thing you could possibly do. And so most people don't understand that. They think that this is a sort of nice to have, but in reality, this is one of the first things. And maybe if we can lay out a little bit of a definition of an asset, because I'd like most people to understand assets a bit differently than they generally do. I like to think of assets as objects versus necessarily assets. And I like to think of it in a stack. There is network layer, right? There is sort of a system layer. There is an operating sort of layer. And then there's an app layer, and then there's a data layer. And I think in all of these layers, there are assets or objects that should be identified, tracked, and managed. And so the obvious ones are the network layers. These are the things with IP addresses, IoT, OT, whatever you want to call it that have IPs. This is pretty obvious. When you start moving up into a system level, this is like infrastructure, cloud, system services, these kinds of things. At an OS level, these are things sitting on an operating system. These can be applications. These can be libraries. These can be all of these types of things. And then when you go up the stack into, let's say, the web application, these are SaaS and SaaS applications and what they run and what sort of APIs that are available. And then it's data layer. Data layer is clearly important as an asset or an object. This is PII, sensitive data, these kinds of things that gets tracked. And so when you think about this in a stack as a CISO, your job is to first and foremost identify these things in the best way possible so that you know what you have, so you know what to protect and how to track that.
Caleb, I think that's a really great point. I think to make sure that you're solving this in the ideal way, it's not enough to have this solved in a point in time form. So like, although like we may align on those definitions, a lot of the time people will basically go off and they'll take a snapshot. They'll take that snapshot, they'll dump it in a spreadsheet, and then they're basically doing manual curation from there. So they may not have had complete coverage in that spreadsheet to begin with, right? So they still have that delta based off of the definition that we just described. And I think it's important to look at all of these different types of assets, asset classes. So you have your packaged software that is installed on all of your devices. You have your SaaS applications. You have your identities. You have your IoT and your OT devices. And also you have this new emerging asset class of AI and AI agents. Well, how do you catalog and inventory them? And then how do you move from quote unquote asset inventory into what I think of and what the market thinks of right now as asset intelligence, which is like, okay, now that I have this inventory, what is it that I actually do with it as well? Because, it's not enough to just have the issues or know what you have out there. It's like, you have to know what you need to do with it from there too.
Would you guys be aligned in saying that we're not talking about CMDB, right? A lot of people sometimes confuse you, and love the example of the Excel sheet, Joe, because having worked in an organization where an asset management was literally an Excel sheet, is this the same as CMDB? Because a lot of people may look at, hey, I've got a CMDB. Isn't that the same as an asset intelligence? Or is that different when people think about assets?
Yeah, it is. It is different. And one of the things that I will say is that a lot of customers that I see use asset intelligence paired with CMDB. So CMDB is also working in most contexts off of network sensors. Network sensors are only going to have partial visibility or through network scanning, right? So if wherever there's a delta, like Blue Inks as an example, as one of our larger customers that use us basically for everything under the sun on our entire platform, they will take the delineation or the delta that they have between CMDB and what it is that they see with Axonius and flush it from Axonius back into their CMDB. So that way they make up that 40% surface area that CMDB was missing.
You know what? The one way I've thought about CMDB, at least I've seen in organizations, is you could expand your scope of assets. CMDB generally will also include business processes, applications, furniture, hardware, physical itemization, a lot of these things. So like, oh, if I want to start a new project, I may have to go into my CMDB, insert my description of my project, what I'm doing and what I'm working on, who the stakeholders are, and then submit it. This then to the business or the enterprise can be considered part of the CMDB versus maybe in other organizations or digital assets may not be considered part of that. Your physical desk or chair may not be considered a part of that. So I've seen these two things separated. But Joe, I'd love to know, like, to me, that just seems like from a theory perspective, it's just a matter of, again, how you define an asset. And so,
it is.
When you think of software, and by the way, we're going to allow you to talk about your product here in this aspect, but hey, can't you just does somebody like Axonius or other products include tracking furniture, physical items, just random business processes too, so it becomes the CMDB? Or do you really think that, Axonius as a product is truly separated and should be paired with a CMDB?
Where CMDB typically leans on being a much more, IT, classic T asset management oriented problem, whereas, Axonius leans much more into the cyber and the attack surface management sort of use cases. So we're much less interested in, like you said, the asset tagging for a chair than we are in the IoT device, which obviously represents a potential threat vector for any organization, of which, like we said, most organizations aren't going to have particularly good capability in terms of making sure that they've cataloged, inventoried, and can respond to all the issues that exist across all of that. And potentially, most importantly, how all of these different assets intersect with each other, right? So it's like, well, what is this IoT asset interacting with across the network? What identities or service accounts is it using? Is it corresponding with, and so forth, which is the other really hard problem. So I think it's also related to, it's like you have to have sort of like a data pipeline that's bringing all these IT systems and security controls together that can sort of do that correlation, enrichment, deduplication, et cetera, as that's another important aspect of it as well. It's like, you don't just want the inventory, you want to be able to take action. You want to know how they're actually interfacing with each other across the board as well.
So a great way that you can think about it is there's digital asset identification, which is sort of like a living, breathing sort of area where products like Axonius sit, versus your CMDB, which is your just IT, physical hardware, business process type of system. That's a good way to, okay.
I think that's a really good way of framing it. And largely it's, again, used for IT asset management sort of use cases, whereas like you're going to use, an Axonius from an attack surface management point of view for more of the cyber oriented scenarios.
Yeah.
What about the AI model ecosystem then? Because at the moment, a lot of people may hear asset management, and you mentioned AI earlier as something that is an asset. Is it, obviously there's just so many variations of AI model, AI agent, and can go into any category. How do you guys define assets in terms of AI then? Because there is AI that is inside my application. There's AI when I say inside, integrated into my application with an LLM model, with an API. And there is the AI agents. Then there are like the open clause of the world that float around in multiple people's endpoint. I'm curious to hear your asset definition in the AI ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think there's AI for security and there's security for AI. AI for security being like, those are the use cases that you are baking into your overall platform that is bringing those AI scenarios. So like as an example, it's like, hey, I have a list of assets. I'm going to use natural language expression to ask questions of the platform, surface use cases, surface problems, make recommendations for how it is that you actually go off and solve things. Fine. Then there's how are you actually going to secure AI in your specific organization itself? I look at as agents as an asset class in the same way that you look at SaaS applications as an asset class, identities as an asset class, and so forth. I think you're going to want to be able to, or need to be able to, catalog all of your agents and understand also how they're interfacing across all of the different asset classes that we just discussed. discussed. What is that AI agent doing in that downstream SaaS application? What identities is it leveraging? What services accounts is it leveraging, and so forth? What did it access? What does it have from an authorization scope perspective? All of this ultimately ties together, which is why I kind of see it as no different than any other asset class. In fact, I think, AI is going to have an entire layer of security controls and solutions no different than any other threat vector has had in the past, right? As mobile operating systems were introduced, like new apps, new controls were added to the fold. The same is going to be true for AI.
I've always actually struggled a bit with being able to answer this question, which is an AI agent. How do we define an AI agent? Let me give you sort of where I get conflicted. Do we define an AI agent as an actual running instance of a LLM loop like Claude Code, right? Or is it the actual Claude Code app itself? Or is it a role as a prompt? Is that considered an agent, right? You can build a skill. A lot of people build skills as agents, right? That obviously then run. Or do we think of it as just the actual executioner loop, the actual Claude Code, the actual codex, the Claude Code for work? How do you define that this is an independent agent that should be an asset that's tracked?
It's a good question. It's kind of also the nature of ephemeral versus not in some cases, because the question there a little bit is it being run one time, or is it being run in perpetuity, running specific use cases and scenarios to some extent?
Roles, skills, or
Yeah.
roles are quote unquote could be just very different agents. I can have a product management role, a CEO role, whatever. Are these considered separate agents or one instance?
Or even the agents that Salesforce third parties have as well, like your Salesforce of the world, Notions of the world.
Notions, yes, yeah.
Well, think about it this way: for a container that gets spun up to deal with load for seasonality, because you're a consumer app and you're running a sale or whatever, and you have to run up some additional nodes to deal with the demand. Would you want to track those containers as assets just because they're up for a short period of time? Those are still a part of your attack surface, even if they're up for only, say, 24 to 36 hours. I think the same is true for an agent that is wanting just one specific task, short part of time, because you still want to catalog it. You still want to know what it did. You still want to have some sort of root cause analysis if something does go wrong with that agent. So I think it's probably an and in this case, not an or. Now, you may say that one is a higher priority than the other, but I think we'll end up in a world in which most organizations are looking at being able to have and needing to have visibility in both of those things. Now, I think the definitions are up in the air. And I think, frankly, all of us are learning this together, right? This is new. And I think if we were having this conversation 9 months ago, we'd be having a different conversation, not fully appreciating how quickly this is going to come at us in the way in which it did. I mean, are you guys not surprised by this as well? It's
I can't keep up. Yeah, I mean, it's everything.
Exactly.
We were supposed to end the podcast
and I can't keep up.
Yeah,
Exactly.
I was going to say that one of the reasons we started this podcast was to keep up with it. And now we're it's been, 3 years now? We're still trying to keep up with it. We haven't achieved the goal yet.
You can spend
really
2-3 hours a day.
Yeah, 3 years.
This has been running for 3 years. Good God.
Yeah,
It's
3
not messing around.
3 years.
Yeah.
3 years ago, this was in its infancy. And it feels like a lot of the growth has come, like I said, in the last 9 to 12 months. And now you can spend 3 hours a day on this and you're still going to be behind.
Oh my God. Yes, that I agree with. But I think you said the right thing, Joe. I think in a way, it is an unexplained, depending on what the appetite of the organization is. Maybe the AI agent definition may evolve, but do you see it as the same to what you said, that the time that it runs and whether you as an organization care about, it doesn't really matter if it's ephemeral or not, as long as it has executed and it has the role attached, you should be classified as an asset. Is that how you define it?
Yes. No, it might be cataloged differently, as in this is an asset that we saw, but it's not an asset that is live anymore, just so you can see it, right? So you can at least have that sort of inventoried and mentioned and have a record of it. But I do think that is an asset that organizations are going to want and need to account for from a security perspective. And then also from an IT standpoint and a governance standpoint and a risk standpoint, you probably still want to understand token utilization and things of that nature for that as well. I think that's all in scope.
Joe, I haven't been in an operating role in quite some time, so I'm a little bit behind on the current state of asset identification. But one of the things I know that I always wanted, and I'm, hopefully that this now exists, but is the ability to sort of time clock or get a history of an asset and its state and its configuration in the past. So for example, I could look at a container that's running, and let's say it's been running for 6 months, that there are snapshots. I could see that, oh, new ports opened up a month and a half ago that didn't exist 2 months ago on a service or an asset, and be able to sort of like, what was that? What was Apple's sort of like backup thing called? What was that? Had a good way back in the day. It was called like time machine. Time machine.
Time machine. Time machine. That's right.
Yeah, time machine, where you can go back and look at where the asset and its state was at that time. Is that something that's existing today?
Yeah, so it does exist today. So the way that we work is we do fetches, and it's all bidirectional API integrations with all the downstream services. And those fetches are effectively time bound and time based. So we can see the deviation in configuration across any single one of the asset classes in between each of those fetches. So you have the ability to sort of like check for the delineation of like, oh, what has changed from a port perspective? Like this port was opened here, but it wasn't before. And as a result, there's now an attack path that has been opened as a result of that port being open. And again, the beauty of it is you see that all correlated to all the different asset classes, because again, any one asset class by itself is interesting. Where it gets really interesting is where it's paired with the other asset classes.
Yeah, and you can query your graph so you can see the connections and what has occurred over that period of time, right?
Exactly.
So one of the other things is that a lot of people think initially, to your original point, is you do this as this sort of snapshot and you get this data and this information. What do you now use it for? What have you found to be sort of the top use cases that has been the most impactful in being able to have this sort of asset knowledge base at your fingertips?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a bunch of different scenarios and use cases that come to mind. One of the ones that is like absolutely clearest is agent coverage or continuous control monitoring as an example. So, just as a simple example, you have using CrowdStrike from, endpoint security perspective, you want to make sure that you have 100% coverage of CrowdStrike deployed on every single one of your devices. As it turns out, when you started with us, you only had 50 or 60% coverage. You're going to use Axonius as sort of your orchestration engine, not just for identification, but also orchestration of here's the 40% delta of the devices that didn't have CrowdStrike installed on it. You're going to use us to basically automate the deployment of CrowdStrike paired with your deployment tool of choice to get that 40% delineation in place. Now, there's a bunch of other areas where that actually surfaces as a massive benefit. Like in the case of when CrowdStrike had their challenge, with the update that kind of took down the world for a little while there. Customers that were using Axonius in that period of time were able to use Axonius to identify all of the different devices that were running that specific version of CrowdStrike for the devices that were bricked, and then go and quickly remediate and fix that effectively instantaneously. So the organizations that had Axonius in place were able to rectify that issue in days, rather than in some cases you had organizations that were taken down for multiple days or even in some cases longer, as a part of that. So that's one of the absolutely core use cases as a part of Axonius for sure. Another one that comes to mind is, it's one thing to have the always up-to-date inventory. What you do with it also rests in prioritizing sort of the vulnerabilities and the risks that exist across that inventory, right? What we give organizations the ability to do is basically, okay, here's like your top 10. Like you may have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of vulns that exist across your entire estate. But here's your top 10, not just based on the CVEs or the CVE scores that are associated with it, but also based on this is on a public network. This is exposed as a result. You need to actually weigh that in the prioritization for your response. Also weighing it based on there's misconfiguration in a downstream cloud application, for example, or MFA is not enabled. There's any number of use cases there. At the end of the day, we are a really robust data platform that surfaces quite literally thousands of use cases, and there's very top universal scenarios by which people use us. Those are just an example of a couple.
Raising and identifying the vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, the reachability, obviously, point of this aspect. Ashish, you were going to say something before I jump in?
Yeah, no, that's okay. I was gonna ask in terms of, I almost heard I heard about the link between asset and vulnerability misconfiguration, because obviously you have access to the cloud information, you have access to the assets, and the gap between what the coverage is. I think for me over there, it was an interesting one, because obviously a lot of people who are enterprise today, they already have, let's just say, CSPM, CNAPP, whatever category you want to put in there as well. Why go down that path of linking the assets, and for lack of a better word, me as a person who's making a decision today, I already have to. You mentioned CrowdStrike earlier.
Yeah, why I already have Wiz. Why wouldn't I just use Wiz for this?
I'm trying to come from a perspective more because a lot of people already are customers of a lot of these solutions already. Like, what made you lean in on the direction for, hey, this is where the industry is going? Because I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. Is that because there's a gap you noticed, or you found the customers are still misunderstood? What made you lean in on that direction?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's a fair question. So I think the reality is like when you, like you said, you have a Wiz for that, and that's great when you're using and leaning heavily on AWS or GCP. Like, that makes a lot of sense. But Office 365 is a downstream cloud application that you have to worry about as critical infrastructure as well. And there's Salesforce and hundreds of other cloud applications that you have to lean into too. Those are all just downstream cloud apps for us, and we just look at those again as another asset class. And also, again, correlating that down to the identity, down to the assets that have access to those. It's really important to be able to pull all of these different data sources together in one view and manage that correlation and enrichment as a part of like one singular data pipeline. So like, we actually look at this from a completely neutral way. Like, we have integrations with Wiz as an example. Like, we don't compete with Wiz. So we maintain sort of like that Swiss mindset of all of our customers. Most of our customers are actually going to use Wiz, and we're actually going to manage that as an integration as well.
And Wiz is just one layer, the infra layer,
exactly,
in that sense of the stack, right?
Exactly. So if customers want to use Wiz for those use cases, we're more than supportive of that, and see that as actually an enablement layer for our story of adopting best in breed.
I was just going to say, I think what I'm taking away so far is that when people think about asset intelligence, they just not need to think about the definition of assets, as you were talking about, the AI agents and everything, but also the integration to the existing ecosystem that they have to pull in all that data that they already draw in, but perhaps are not able to create a mind map of to make something useful out of it, apart from the fact that, hey, I know I have 20,000 assets. That makes sense.
Which makes me excited if I have this for one particular reason. Ashish, do you know why?
We have spoken about this before, but I think I'll let you speak about this.
Now, like, this is a phenomenal context for AI, right?
Yep,
like, the first thing I want to do is I want to hook Claude Code up to this system, right? Like, any system or software that has the level of asset intelligence that we're talking about here would be phenomenal in its ability to be able to make smart decisions and monitor and understand what's going on. So Joe, tell me, how does these products, or your product in specific, we're also going to allow you to talk about Axonius here. How in AI are you allowing this sort of integration and compatibility?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of different ways, and thank you for allowing me to talk about Axonius in this case as well. No one wants to buy anything.
We want to make sure it doesn't sound like a sales pitch to everybody.
It should never sound like a sales pitch. I'm honestly a really big believer in delivering value in these conversations, and then that tends to lead to very naturally good conversations, right? So I think that the context that you can get from Axonius, where you can't really get that data and that context in any other way without a lot of manual curation, is like really the ground truth for AI. So the way that we're solving this is we're going to have integrations, of course, with all of the downstream. So agree with you 100%, Caleb. Is the net of it. We know the context that we bring is going to be, very helpful in terms of helping all of the compensating controls that exist across the organization make more informed decisions as a result of having the context in Axonius.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely powerful, right? Like, I find that, we know Ashish and I, we've talked many times about the fact that, today AI or AI agents per se are very, very good at, I would say, two things. Obviously, building, coding, and being able to do that. And then number two, I think being able to do automation of just standard workflows in some sense with some reasoning. But the thing that AI has really lacked is its ability to operate and manage, right? It doesn't have the ability to understand the context of very large infrastructure systems capability to operate and manage. And if you can bring, the ground truth of, here is how everything's laid out, here's how it works, here's the history of how it all works, here's the configuration of how it all works, and then how it's changing then I think that really helps AI to reach that next level of, oh, I can now write an agent in Claude Code that can potentially manage or operate systems by being able to have that context, which is super exciting.
Couldn't have said it better myself, Caleb. It's the context that gives you the faith in taking action on things as well, even from a manual curation perspective, let alone, automation or orchestration with agents, right? So I mean, we've been talking about automation in cyber for how long? And there's a lot that's still done through manual curation, right? Like you guys know that as well as anyone.
I have an interesting question, Bay, just to piggyback on the same conversation about AI usage. I'm curious about your vision for where this would go, because obviously you are seeing a lot of customers use your asset intelligence and the product you guys have. We're also seeing a lot of AI forward companies thinking about, hey, moving forward, I just want to use these intelligent data points or platforms, if you want to use that word, as a source for me to make an informed decision about my organization. Where's your vision with how the platforms would evolve on how AI would be consuming information that you guys provide and the ecosystem provides in general? Do you have some insights there in terms of what you're probably seeing with some of the customers already?
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, I think best of breed is still going to have very much so a place in our industry. I mean, as you guys know, there's a lot of pressure on organizations right now from a budget perspective. So there is some consolidation that continues to happen from a platform standpoint. I think we're going to continue to see that to some extent. Like that's not going to change, but I don't think organizations are going to be completely willing to sacrifice like what amounts to best in breed and the use cases that they get from like really exploring with adjacent solutions that exist in market to help them solve their problems. I mean, we've essentially bet on that at Axonius, right? I mean, we are a company at the end of the day that enables choice, that enables best of breed, that enables you to adopt whatever control it is you want, regardless of who the vendor is. So whether it's a relatively small and emerging company that, is showing signs of light and addressing key concerns, or it's a large platform player, we're going to have deep integrations with both of them. So we have deep integrations with the Ciscos, and the Whizzes and the Googles, and we have deep integrations with the Sierras as like the late stage startups as an example. And we look at those as equal weights, and they're more focused on what the customer and the market needs from us.
So I guess to what you were saying earlier, the asset intelligence kind of platform could become that the source which integrates with, say, obviously across the organization, across multiple tiers, but with giving you information about the quote unquote exposure that you may have or reachability that may be lacking at the moment. But it also allows for me as an AI forward person to be hooking my AI capability into your platform and draw out that information for whatever my AI agent needs to do.
Yeah, one of the things that I think as a practical example we've talked about on this podcast before is we have this thesis that states that a big security problem, or really any problem, has been the war of dashboards, right? Where Axonius has a dashboard, Sierra has a dashboard, every vendor has a dashboard, and it's hugely problematic and it doesn't quite show the right data. You can't merge the data, you can't cross-reference the data, and this has become problematic. However, in the world of AI now, what AI is phenomenal at being able to do is sort of create your own BI in that sense. So now when we think 2-3 years from now, when you think about your product, does your UI, your interface, your dashboard become less important and it become more about the APIs and the things that are available to it so that the enterprise customers are now using AI to just pull the data and customize and merge the data with whatever other products they have to build the dashboard that suits their style? Like, how do you sort of see that arc or not? Or maybe you could just say, I don't believe it. Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, totally fine as well if you don't believe it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a great question. And it's one that we've been talking about a lot recently internally. And it's one that I've been exploring with customers as well. And these are some of the largest customers in the world. And I'm excited about a world that has no traditional UI UX. So that kind of answers your question on the front end here. And I'll tell you why. It's like, I actually do see in the next 3 to 5 years, the traditional UI going away and everything basically becoming a prompt effectively. You're asking a question of a platform versus clicking through UI, configuring settings in the traditional world that we all grew up with and what we're all accustomed with as practitioners. But I don't think that's going to change immediately, especially from like an enterprise perspective. Like it's going to take time for them to evolve to these changes. I think you still are going to have pretty good UI UX for the next 3 to 5 years. But I think at a certain point, like once legal and compliance teams and whatnot have caught up with all the sort of like emerging evolving requirements and the risks that are coming as a result of the new technologies that organizations are adopting. After that, it's going to be, I think, the traditional UI effectively goes away. We're just going to be using natural language to express ourselves to every platform. Everything's going to become fairly agentic from an orchestration and automation perspective, and it's going to be quite transformative. I actually look at this from an AI perspective as, frankly, the biggest change that we've seen in the industry in our lifetimes. Like, this is not the movement of on-prem to cloud. Like, this is not the proliferation of mobile. This is like the creation of the internet.
Yeah. We're changing the way software is built and
Completely.
used. Yeah.
Completely.
And like when you say the interface goes away, like I have one view, but then let me if I validate this, my view is that dashboards don't go away per se. Dashboards just become dynamically generated based upon the needs and uses of your customer. Or are you talking about you just have a straight chat box and that becomes the new interface,
or an API that you just connect to? My theory is that it would just be an API that me as a user just plug into. If I'm a SOC person or an AppSec person or whoever, every time there's an incident comes up, instead of me trying to find out, hey, who owns this asset and what else is linked to the asset, could be an API call. I know obviously there are three options. Obviously you don't want to cloud your answer, no, but which one do you lean on?
But are they really that different? I mean, what's behind the chat prompt is a bunch of APIs, right? Behind the scenes. So like whether you're doing that from a technical perspective or from a business perspective, you're getting ultimately to the same outcome at the end. A dashboard dynamically populating, is it more useful to have a dashboard that is structured in a way that you asked it to be initially, or should you just be asking new and emerging questions via prompt based on whatever it is that you're trying to solve at any moment? I mean, I would argue the latter.
Dashboard based on your prompt is sort of what you're saying.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And it's like, I don't think a static dashboard is as useful as we want it to be. I think it's just the way that we've always worked, right? So it's like we're used to this sort of like dashboard dynamic of like, hey, here's my dashboard for my KPIs. But like, that was the world of yesterday. I think the world of today is like everything is so fluid and changing so quickly now with how people work, where even like one employee, like leveraging AI properly can become 10, if not more, right? Like it's an exponent on people. Yeah. So it's like we have to change how it is that we're working and evolve our working styles. And I think that means the static dashboard, even if it's dynamically populated, is dead. I think it's going to be more like asking dynamic and fluid questions of the data that you have, and even maybe asking it to tell you things like, hey, what am I not thinking about that I should be thinking about? Tell me what I should be thinking about, because you have everything and are able to think.
You're smarter than I am, so tell me what.
Exactly. I mean, that is the spirit of like what it is that we're trying to accomplish here. And if AI is masterful at anything, it's going to be really good at pattern matching on effectively a much larger data set that our brains can process.
My question was more for people who are watching this. It would be really interesting to hear, how do you want people to think about like the questions they should be asking for asset intelligence moving forward? Because obviously we're talking about now there's an AI future that we're all walking towards. Some people may be already there or trying to get there. Some people are trying to think about. I truly believe at least everyone has some level of asset management, even if it's an Excel sheet. How should people approach this in an AI world as they're going towards? Are there like some questions people should be asking themselves as they approach this problem today? Because to what you said, even defining AI agent as an asset is like a multi-layer question that we were talking about earlier. So I'm curious if you have some simple framework or thinking that you normally talk to customers about so they can think about this as they move forward with the AI world.
Yeah, I mean, this is not exclusively just AI. It's been exacerbated by AI, but it's three simple questions. What do you actually have? So every device, identity, SaaS app, cloud workload, OT asset, AI agents, AI permissioned accounts. How do you know what you have across all of those different dimensions continuously? And not just as like some CMDB snapshot, which is only going to give you partial coverage anyway. So that's question one. Question two is, what are the exposures that we have across that state that actually matter? So this isn't just like a CVE list. It's the combination of the asset plus the identity plus the integration plus the data sensitivity that together is what actually formulates the risk. So that's question number two. And then question three is like, now that you have that information, how do you act on it today in minutes? And how do you do that without leaving whatever platform it is that you have a choice? So it's like that gets you to a place of real governed action with an actual audit trail, not like puts you in a scenario of opening a ticket and hoping for the best. So if you don't know the answer to these questions, like you have to start with number one, like you have to start with sort of like this always up to date catalog, this always up to date inventory, and then you'll get the rest from there. But you got to start with number one.
Caleb, final question before we wrap up, man.
Man, I don't know if this is a good final question, but we can rotate it in the audio.
Sure. Okay.
But I wanted to ask a hard question, Joe. So as a CEO of a pretty significant vendor, our talk AI is very powerful. And it could be very powerful in the hard way too, which is a couple things we know about AI. AI allows us to do integrations in 5 minutes now, right? AI allows us to be why wouldn't I just write my own agent to do identification, do asset intelligence, do the integrations that I require? Why do I need a vendor anymore? Which goes to the wrap up of the hard question I think every vendor has some fear of and deep thought on. I'd love to get your opinion, which is what scares you about AI when it comes to you as a business and as sort of the leader of that business?
It's a good question. I don't look at this fearfully. I look at AI as more of a tailwind and an opportunity than something that I look at as like I'm scared of, or the business should be scared of. And I hope most businesses are able to look at it in this context as well. Really, the heart of the question that you're asking there, Caleb, is what's the moat? Like, why can't I just like go off and try to replicate, an Axonius? And the answer to that is you can try. You're going to have to go build 1,400 integrations, and they're going to have to be very deep integrations. And then you're going to have to build a data pipeline on top of it that can actually do, the correlation and the normalization and then enrichment. And then you're going to have to figure out like how it is that you're actually going to
think about it from a customer perspective. They don't want to compete with Axonius as a business, but they may say, well, I don't need 1,400. I just need the integrations for my business. And that may be 50 or 100. And that's good enough to then say, I'll go and do it.
Sure. And then look, that's the case. It's like, I'm sure you guys have experimented with Cloud Code, and you got in the same way that I have. It's really great at getting that initial concept out the door. But with enterprise software, you guys know that there's a lot to it in terms of like updating it, scaling it, keeping it live, handling the enterprise feature functionality. So that could be everything from data scopes to single sign-on or whatever the case may be. There's no shortage of things that you're consistently adding to it and extending it. That's where Cloud Code becomes maybe a little less adept. Right. So I don't think there's any shortage of reasons. Like there's going to be a number of use cases that Cloud Code is incredibly good at, where we can really do phenomenal things with how it is able to extend our speed and our capacity. But I think fully replicating enterprise platforms is not the most obvious one. Now, for certain other types of software, like collaboration platforms that are solving relatively basic use cases, not very nuanced use cases like Axonius solves, it becomes a very different conversation very quickly, Caleb. But at the end of the day, it's really like, how many moats do you have? And do those moats go from being moats into an ocean? And if you have an ocean, that's tough ground to cross.
Yeah, I think that vibes with what Ashish and I have also kind of come to this conclusion that the moat actually turns out to be pretty obvious. It's existed forever, which is accountability, the consistency, ability to scale, benefits from other customers. With AI, you can build, but at least today, you can't operate and manage. And therefore, that everyone can build it, but actually it turns out they don't want to operate it and manage it. And so this actually turns out to be, I don't want to do this. I can build it, sure. But like at the end of the day, let's go get someone to go do it.
And you guys probably know this too. The same is the case with software engineers with software that they built with their hands, right? It's like they have the shiny object syndrome of building the cool thing on the front end, but they don't want to maintain it either. Right. So it's funny how that works even when it comes to AI.
I actually had numbers funny enough. I was on a talk recently, which Guy Pope, Caleb and I both know Guy Pope from Sneak founder. And funny enough, one of the stats he shared was there were 2.1 million Claude Code skills created in the 6 months that we existed in this 2026. But not a lot of them are managed to what we're trying to get to as well. They're actually coming up with numbers to prove the point where everyone's creating a prototype, but no one seems to be willing to maintain, distribute, and as I said, they maintain the entire life cycle. Is a whole other story. But
that's right.
I think that's a great place to wrap up. Where can people find more about Axonius and the work you guys are doing over there, Joe?
Yeah, check out Axonius.com. We're always happy to talk shop about everything, asset intelligence and AI in particular. Love to talk some more. Thanks, Ashish and Caleb. It was great chatting with you.
I mean, the pleasure was ours, man. Thanks so much for doing this.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you for watching or listening to that episode of AI Security Podcast. This was brought to you by TechRiot.io. If you want to hear or watch more episodes of AI Security, check that out on AISecurityPodcast.com. And in case you are interested in learning more about cloud security, you should check out our sister podcast called Cloud Security Podcast, which is available on cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next episode. Peace.